The last call the rain tapped against the windows of Blackwood High like bony fingers. David Mercer sat alone in his classroom, the yellow glow of his desk lamp the only light pushing back against the creeping dark. The stacks of ungraded papers had become a monument to his exhaustion. 10 years teaching in this dying town, watching the students grow fewer, the halls quieter, the shadows longer. A gust of wind howled through the cracks in the old building, carrying with it the faintest echo of something metallic, a sound that shouldn't have been there. David paused, pen hovering over a half-marked essay. The school's bell tower had been sealed off since before his time, its gears rusted, its voice silenced. And yet, for a moment, he could have sworn he heard the ghost of a chime. Then the phone rang. The sound was so sharp, so sudden, that David jerked in his seat. His eyes snapped to the landline on his desk, a relic from the 90s, its coiled cord yellowed with age. The district had switched to a digital system years ago. This thing hadn't worked in a decade. IT rang again. David reached for it, hesitated. The air in the room had gone thick, charged. Some primal part of his brain screamed to him to leave it, to walk out and not look back. He picked up. "Hello." Static hissed back at him, a low, wet crackle like a dying radio signal. Then, beneath the noise, a voice, thin, frayed at the edges, as if dragged through miles of bad wire. "Mr. Mercer." David's grip tightened on the receiver. He knew that voice. Knew it like he knew the sound of his own name, Ethan Cole, his star. Student. The one who'd vanished the night of the senior bonfire 10 years ago. The one whose face still stared back from missing posters that had long since faded in the windows of shuttered shops. Ethan. David's throat was dry. "Where? You have to stop it." The words were a whisper, urgent. "Before the bell rings." Again. A click. The line went dead. David sat frozen, the receiver still pressed to his ear. The silence that followed was worse than the voice. It was the silence of a held breath, of something waiting just beyond the edge of sight. Then, from somewhere deep in the school, a door creaked open, slow. Deliberate, David stood, the chair scraping loud against the floor. The hallway outside his classroom was empty, the fluorescent lights flickering like failing stars. At the far end, the door to the bell tower, always locked, always forbidden, stood slightly ajar. A draft slithered through the corridor, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something older, something rotten from the darkness beyond. The door, something shifted. David took a step back. The bell tower hadn't been opened in 30 years, but something had opened it tonight, and now it was coming out. The rain had turned to a slow, icy drizzle by the time David Mercer stepped into the hallway. His shoes squeaked against the linoleum, the sound absurdly loud in the empty corridor. The flickering fluorescent lights cast long, trembling shadows. That seemed to twitch at the edges of his vision. He shouldn't be here. The rational part of his brain, the part that still clung to daylight logic, told him to call the police. To report a prank, a break-in, anything that could explain the phone call. But the voice. God, the voice had sounded exactly like Ethan. Not the Ethan from the missing posters, frozen in time at 17, but an older, wearier version. As if he'd been alive all these years, trapped somewhere just out of reach. The door to the bell tower loomed ahead. IT was older than the rest of the school, its wood warped and blackened with age. A heavy padlock usually secured it, but now it hung broken, the metal twisted as if something had wrenched it apart from the inside. The gap between the door and its frame was no wider than a finger, but it was enough. Enough to see the absolute darkness beyond. Enough to smell the damp, fungal reek of something long sealed away. David reached for his phone, thumb hovering over 911. Then he stopped. What would he say? "I got a call from a dead kid, and now a door's open." They'd laugh him out of the precinct. Or worse, send him for a psych eval. Blackwood Sheriff had never been patient with what he called superstitious nonsense. A sound from inside the tower. A scrape. A shuffle, like something dragging itself across stone. David's breath hitched. He should leave. Right now. Get in his car, drive until the gas ran out, never look back. But then, Mr. Mercer. The voice came from behind him. David whirled, heart slamming against his ribs. The hallway was empty. But the air had changed. Thickened. The shadows at the far end of the corridor seemed to pulse, to breathe. You should have stopped it. This time, the voice came from inside the tower. David stumbled back, shoulder hitting the wall. The door creaked wider, inch by inch, revealing a sliver of crumbling stairs spiraling upward into blackness. Something glinted on the bottom step. A phone. An old rotary phone, its cord severed, lying in a nest of dust and dead insects. The same phone that had just rung on his desk. A drop of water fell from the ceiling, striking the receiver. The sound it made wasn't a splash. It was a chime. The first note of the school bell, and from somewhere high above, in the belly of the tower, something began to laugh. The laughter echoed through the bell tower, a sound like rusted hinges screaming. David's hands trembled as he reached for the ancient rotary phone on the steps. The moment his fingers brushed the cold plastic, a jolt of static shot up his arm. Flash, suddenly. He wasn't in the tower anymore. He stood in the school parking lot, but wrong. The asphalt shimmered like a mirage. Students milled about, their faces blurred, their laughter muffled as if heard through thick glass. The sky burned an unnatural orange, and there, by the old oak tree, Ethan Cole. Not the ghost from the phone, but flesh and blood Ethan, 17 years old, arguing with someone David couldn't quite see. "You promised it would just be a joke." Ethan's voice cracked with panic. The unseen figure responded in a whisper that made David's teeth ache. Then Ethan turned, his eyes locking onto David's with impossible awareness. "You have to remember," David gasped, back in the tower, clutching the phone like a lifeline. The laughter above him had stopped. The silence was worse. Something wet dripped onto his shoulder. He looked up at the shadows of the bell tower's rafters. Shapes moved. Not rats. Not birds. Things with too many joints in their limbs, their bodies twisting in ways that made David's stomach lurch. One of them cocked its head, eyes glinting like tarnished coins. "The bell always rings at midnight, Mr. Mercer," it whispered in Ethan's voice. "You made sure of that." David's mind flooded with images that weren't his own. A bonfire. A dare. A group of teenagers sneaking into the tower on a drunken whim. A ritual they'd thought was just small-town legend. A bell they'd rung for fun, and something they'd woken up. The creature dropped from the rafters with a sound like breaking piano wires. David ran, the tower door slamming shut behind him with supernatural force. He didn't stop until he crashed into someone in the hallway. Principal Alvarez, her flashlight beam cutting through the dark. "David, what the hell are you doing here so late?" He opened his mouth to explain, then froze. Behind her, the school's antique clock ticked toward midnight, and down the hall, the bell tower door stood wide open again, empty, waiting. The last chime of the clock echoed through the halls as the hand struck 12. Somewhere high above, rusted. Gears began to turn. The bell was about to ring, and whatever came through this time wouldn't be satisfied with just one missing student.